Welcome everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar, Be a Powerful Presenter. My name is Christy Foster. I'm Head of Engagement here at Conservation Careers. And being someone who has, as many of us, experienced absolute terror at public speaking in the past, I'm really thrilled to be here with today's guest, Tara Phillips, to talk about this topic that affects almost all of us. And public speaking is actually something that's ranked up there with things like fear of dying and fear of spiders. And it affects us whether we're walking into a hall with hundreds of people, or into an interview, or into a boss's office or a colleague's office. So today we're here to get some very valuable insights straight from a public speaking expert and trainer and coach. Her name is Tara Phillips. So thanks for being here, Tara.
You're welcome.
And we're gonna introduce you properly in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to give everyone else who's joining here a moment also to quickly type your name and your country into the chat box. We'd love to hear where you're joining from. And I can see that we started just on time today. So we've probably got some people who'll still be joining us over the next few minutes. Excellent. So I can see the Netherlands, Croatia, UK, United States, Portugal, South Africa, Scotland, Sweden, Colombian living in Mexico, welcome. Bienvenido. UK, fantastic. Bolivia, great. Thanks everyone for being here. And now I'd like to introduce today's guest, Tara Phillips. So Tara is she's a public speaking expert, trainer, and coach. She's the founder of Cause and Effect Speeches, which is a presentation and communication skills company based in the Netherlands. She's been a TEDx speaker coach since 2010, and she works with presenters of all levels, so all the way from students right up to executives. And some of her clients have included international companies like Nikon and NGOs like Greenpeace. And it's really exciting that she's looking to put all this wealth of experience she has and knowledge she has to help the natural world. So a very warm welcome, Tara. And it would be lovely if you could just briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Thank you, Christy. So, as you can probably hear, I'm a Brit, but I've actually been living in the Netherlands for over 20 years now. So I really call that, home. And actually, way before I became a speaker coach by profession, I'm one of those strange people that it was actually my hobby. And I was a thing called a Toastmaster. I don't know if anybody here on the webinars knows about Toastmasters. And I really loved it as a medium to communicate new ideas, inform people, bring new ideas. So when I found out about TED.com, I thought, I have got to get involved. And I was really lucky. TEDx Amsterdam had just started. So I offered my speech coaching services to TEDx Amsterdam. But I hadn't actually ever done any speech coaching before. Now, I was running my own life coaching practice, so I knew how to get people from where they were to where they wanted to be. And oratory had been my hobby for about 5 years. I just hadn't actually put it together before. So when they wrote back saying, yes, would you like to coach some of our TEDx speakers? I was like, yes, I'm in with TED. No, what am I going to do? But actually working with these dedicated, dynamic people was probably one of the best things that I'd ever done. And I'd kind of walk out of the coaching sessions just tingling with excitement. So when I saw them on stage, I had a sense of pride that rivaled seeing my son get his swimming diploma. So that was it. I had discovered the professional love of my life. 10, 12 years later, here I am with you, really now wanting to bring the last 12 years of knowledge to the natural world. I love nature. And it's just breaking my heart what's happening with the biodiversity loss. And professionally, I just want to do my little bit to help communicate and therefore make a difference.
That's amazing. Thanks so much, Tara. We're so excited because I think we're using only just this fraction of the skills we can use in this sector to communicate really, really important messages.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think we also all of us that are in conservation want to get to that point that you're at, where we get excited about speaking and presenting, you know, and it's a thrill rather than, you know, something that's terrifying or daunting. So that's really exciting also. Okay. Well, we're very happy to have you here, and
thank you.
I want to get right into the sort of the meat of our discussion. So we're going to spend the next probably about 40 minutes in a discussion. We're going to cover things like why and how you must connect and engage with a crowd, how to avoid death by PowerPoint, which we've all heard of, the do's and don'ts of crafting a compelling story, how to leave your audience with a message that sticks, and hopefully, if there's time, also the secret ingredients of presentations that influence and persuade. At the end, we're going to leave time for a Q&A. So if you have questions for Tara, you'll have a chance to ask those at the end. When you do so, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat, just so it's easier to keep track of the questions. And also that will enable you to upvote questions that you like. And so we'll leave some space for that at the end. All right, so I think just to get us started off, we thought we'd ask everyone who's joining us today a question, which is, how do you feel about presenting? So just take a moment and type your thoughts into the chat box, and we'll just use that to start off our discussion. And it can be whatever comes to your mind first. How do you feel about presenting? I can't tell if there's just a delay or, oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, so confused, not knowing where to start, a little nervous, terrified, and I'm a teacher. Excited, but becoming more nervous, daunted, excited. Yeah, so it looks like a real mix of emotions, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, there's actually a fine line between nerves and excitement. And often what we want to do is kind of channel that nervousness into something that actually is excitement, that is something that's more positive. It's actually a very similar feeling in our bodies.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
So
conflicting things happening at once.
So unfortunately, you know, from what we're seeing in the chat, you know, for loads of people, it is challenging and it is nerve-wracking. We're exposed, we're vulnerable, we're worried about getting it right. So it's no wonder that there's reluctance. But it is actually a really amazing tool. You get seen. There's visibility, you know, you build credibility, you can build so much more of a network. People see you and respond to the work that you're doing, and therefore potentially maybe get more opportunities. It also really helps you climb the career ladder. There's a saying, leaders are speakers and speakers are leaders. And the more advanced we get in our career, it's just a part of our job to present. So it's really essential. It builds confidence. You know, once we get over those nerves and we start seeing some successes, it's really, really a great feeling. I mean, I was the same as everybody. You know, I used to be so nervous. Actually, I still am. My heart was going like this before we went on. It never quite goes away. And it also is a really big boost to a career. I have an amazing stat here that fear of public speaking can potentially cut wages by 10% and reduces promotion by management by 15%. because effective communication skills are so sought after when it comes to employers when they're employing people. So no matter what field you're in, presenting is just so important. But it is really difficult to get over that kind of first hurdle of reluctance, doing something that you don't want to do. No thanks, I'm going to do the thing that I like doing. So how can we get over that hurdle? Well, I've got this really simple trick that works really well, not only with presenting, but anything that you have to do, but you don't really want to. And that's changing the framing of how you do it. Now, I don't know about you, but I've heard so many times, I have to give this presentation at work. I have to give a presentation about the research that I've just done. I'm going to have to give a speech at a conference. And it doesn't fill you with any kind of enthusiasm. But what if you changed it around and you said, I get to share my interesting findings, or I get to highlight this really important issue to loads and loads of people, or I get to move this topic that I care about forward. It's just so much more inspiring, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is.
So I think that, if we can look at it more positively, what can we get out of presenting rather than what do we have to do? I think that's a really good start.
It's such a simple change too, isn't it? Just reframing the question into an opportunity, into something exciting. That's so neat. Okay, so why is it that you need to really connect and engage with a crowd? And also, how can you do that?
Yeah.
A small question.
Exactly. So for me, the why is because these days we can get our information, get our data, be educated in so many different ways. We can read books, we can read articles, there are so many ways that we can do it, and yet we're still choosing to actually use public speaking. And I kind of think, well, why would we do that? Because actually it does have its constraints. If you think when you're watching a presentation, if you didn't hear what they just said, you can't rewind or read back to catch up. You also can't do it on demand, maybe so easily. There's all of these things that potentially is a constraint with public speaking, and yet it started 2,500 years ago, and it's still happening today. So why is it just so prevalent still? Well, I think it's because it's the human interaction. We want that human connection. We want it to be coming from somebody rather than reading it. It just changes the complete dynamic of it. So if we are having a human interaction, then we need to connect and engage with the people that we're presenting to. We need to have it maybe look more like a conversation than even that we're talking maybe at people. So for me, that's the essential. Why do we need to connect and engage? Because it's about having that human interaction. But the how, I mean, there's a million hows, but I'm going to cover a couple. First of all, just with regards to our setup, we can really help ourselves. So now most people are now presenting virtually. I know that we're moving back into in real life, but I think it's going to be virtual for a long time. And if you think about it, I'm going to move a little bit forward. Most of us present like this, and then that means that we're just getting a headshot, and then it's really super difficult to read all of the different cues. So one of the things that I would say is step back from your laptop if you can, because then when you step back from your laptop and show as much of your body as possible, then you're giving not only verbal cues, but non-verbal cues. And it's so much easier then to connect and engage with someone. And then what you can see, what I'm doing now is I'm gesturing. And communication in a complete picture is verbal and non-verbal. And so we're always actually looking out for filling in gaps with the non-verbals. And so it's just so much better if we actually see people, because we've got that connection and engagement going on. So I would definitely recommend step away from the laptop, so there's more of that whole communication picture. Another thing that I would also recommend when it comes to virtual communication is having a look at how the screen is set up. Now, most virtual communication platforms have it that the presenters are just a little thing in the bottom of the corner, and then the slides are absolutely massive. But presenting needs to be about the presenter as well as the slides. So my recommendation would be have a little search in your settings and just see if you can find another way of presenting, which I would say side by side is really great. I also know that now Microsoft Teams is trying a newscaster approach where you're actually, you as the presenter are in front of your slides, which is really cool. But basically have it so that the presenter, the person, is as big or even bigger than the slides themselves, which are pretty static and uninteresting. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense.
Oh, great, great.
I think it's so much more. I just want to say I really enjoy watching you present, actually. We're sort of seeing this live as you're talking about it, because we can see so much of you. And what a difference that makes when you're up close here with the screen versus far away and we can see the gestures. And
interestingly, Stanford University did research on Zoom fatigue. And one of the reasons why we get Zoom fatigue is also because we're really, really close up. In real life, we never have eye contact so close. And so what's happening is that our eyes are having to work so hard all the time. And that's one reason why we get so tired on screen all the time. So another reason why stepping back actually is really advantageous. But another way that we can connect and engage is asking questions. Now, already you're doing it today. You've asked questions of the participants through the chat. And later on, we're going to do a poll. So all of these things that get people involved is just really, really good. Another thing that we can do, if maybe it's not right to get something so direct, is ask a rhetorical question. So if we're actually making a formal presentation, when we get asked a rhetorical question, immediately our brain goes into engage mode. As humans, we can't help but kind of answer questions. So when at the introduction, we can say, so what's the reason for this decline? Immediately, all the audience is going, what could be the reason for this decline? Or if we say, what could we do to have more of an impact? It immediately engages people. So rhetorical questions are really great for that kind of engagement. One step further from that is hands up questions. I love hands up questions. So it means that you get people involved, but at a safe distance, so that it can do two things. One is that if everybody's putting their hands up, you ask a question that deliberately everybody's going to answer. People look around, either virtually or in real life, and think, community. There's people here that think the same things as I do. And you start actually creating a community in the room. Now, another thing that you can do with a hands up question is gauge the room. You know, so often we just don't know, well, what are people thinking? You know, people are quite often pan-faced. Did they understand that? Are they being inspired by that? And you can have a hands up question to gauge, you know, I'm not sure if that point just landed. Hands up if you understood it. And then you get that immediate feedback from presenting that you might not otherwise get. So I love hands up question. And a really, really interesting thing is that if you say hands up and you put your hands up at the same time, you get so many more people responding. So that's really good. If you go hands up, who did this? Really, really different to hands up, who did this? So that's a really nice little tip there. Now, one thing that I would avoid is asking for a specific answer, because we've spoken about how nerve-wracking it is to be a presenter, but you know what? It's actually quite nerve-wracking to be in the audience as well, and all of a sudden have an answer, a question sprung on you. So, in fact, people quite often just go, I don't know. So unless you've really warmed up your audience, unless they're really, really ready to actually kind of shout answers out, I would avoid doing that, because nobody wants kind of tumbleweed of silence. It's like nobody actually answers anything. It's really uncomfortable. So yeah, they're my 2 tips for today on how to get connection and engagement, screen-wise and questions.
That's brilliant. I love it. And it feels like it really just taps into sort of human nature and human psychology, doesn't it?
Indeed. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Tara and I were joking before we went live that I couldn't physically get any further away from my screen and still be able to manage the controls, because I was kind of itching backwards. But it's such a useful takeaway, and such a simple thing we can do to show more of our body.
Can I just actually add something to that? That's a really big issue, because obviously we're usually working and we're on a laptop, so we have to stay close. So what I recommend, actually having an external laptop keyboard, external keyboard, because then you can actually really come back and actually still do the things that you need to do. So that's a really worthwhile investment, actually.
Can I ask, Tara, are you standing right now?
I am, yes.
Yeah, I like that too.
It creates a different energy.
It does. Neat. All right. Well, that's really useful already. And now let's dive into this, more the topic of presentation specifically, and this term that we often hear, death by PowerPoint.
Yes.
How do we avoid that?
Well, do you know how actually the phrase even comes about?
No, actually, I don't.
PowerPoint, because of all the bullets. By all of the bullets, which I think is it's a really interesting way of looking at things. But also, you know, sometimes we do kind of sitting in a presentation and feel like we're dying if we're overloaded. What I'm going to do is share my screen with you, because I think it's one of those things that is certainly easier to show. And typical. We're right at the end. We just did the rehearsal, didn't we? And I didn't bring it back. Okay, great. All right. So I would say that most of us have actually sat in presentations where these are the kind of slides that we have. In fact, I would say that most of us have probably given presentations where these are the kind of slides that we have. But it can be done better. The problem with slides like this is that we can actually take in only a small amount in a presentation situation before we actually get cognitive overload. And when we get cognitive overload, it's really difficult for us to stay engaged. So then that's when we start picking up our phone and playing or going on Twitter or something like that. And then people aren't listening to us. Also, it's really, really quite difficult for an audience to maybe focus in the right direction. As the expert and the person who's created the slides, you're going to know something like this inside out. But for us as the audience, we don't know where to focus. We don't know what's important and what's not. And these days, this is a more likely scenario, exactly what I was talking about, the presenter in the corner, and then the slides and all of those bullets down the side. So can we do it differently? Well, we can switch over to what I call kind of like superstar presenters, and they have, you know, hardly anything on a slide, really, really eye-catching. We've got Ted, who we said I work for, you know, really, really stunning visuals, but they're not really realistic for us as we present in our everyday life. We don't have designers at hand. We don't have hours of time to create stunning slides. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes going down a happy medium and just showing you kind of like different possibilities. So we could start off like this. And actually a lot of people do start off like this, where there are full sentences on a screen. We've got bullet points. I will talk about how it is really good to have a strong structure so that the audience can follow and understand. And then I might talk about, you know, it's really important that you have goals, otherwise you never get there. I'll also talk about how it's really, really important that we think about our audience, that it's not about what we want to say, but what do they want to hear. But as you're probably noticing, it's really not easy. And also, you know, most people in the audience are smart. And so what they'll do is they'll start trying to skim read, and they've actually stopped listening to me at all, and they're now just reading what's on the slide. And so then the connection and engagement is lost, or people might get so overwhelmed with what's on there and just listen to me. But whatever happens, you've actually lost 50% of your audience, whatever they choose to do. So can we do it differently? Well, yes, we can. Quite simply, we can do it differently, and we can cut full sentences down to key words. And what we can do is we can bring them in as we are talking about that subject. So then we can talk about why it's important to have a strong logical structure, because we need to take our audience on a journey of discovery until we get to the conclusion. We can talk about getting clear on the outcomes, because what's the point in talking if we don't have a goal and there isn't something that we want to reach to? We can then start thinking about coming to the perspective of your audience. So as you can see already, that's just so much easier to digest, because we're giving the focus of where people want to listen. But we still have the bullets. So could we get away from the bullets completely? Well, you could actually. So this is another way that we could bring it in. And with PowerPoint these days and the shape makers, it actually doesn't take much longer to create than maybe the bullets. So what we could do is we could start having an icon instead for the do's. What do you do? We start introducing color. Green is for go. And we get rid of the bullets completely. And so we actually we talk about the strong logical structure, the key outcomes, and so and so and so and so. And again, it just helps even more with the digestion and the accessibility of the material. And then we bring in another color, red, don't go there, for all the things that we shouldn't do. So again, we're doing images and words at the same time, which makes everything become so much more accessible. But could we actually do it differently? Yes, we could. At the moment, everything is still on one page. And that's not actually necessarily essential. You know, there used to be a thing where they say, oh, how many slides do they have? Oh my goodness, they've got 36 slides. But I think it's not necessarily how many slides you have, it's how dense those slides are. You could have 36 slides that are very, very easy to digest and would actually be preferable to 5 absolutely crammed slides. So what we could do is that we could say we need a logical structure, and actually maybe show a logical structure to that and talk our way through it. We could have a really powerful image, getting clear on outcomes. You know, we can imagine that we've got our speaking goal and we're going up to our speaking goal. What do we want to achieve with this presentation? How do we know when it's going to be a success? Or again, thinking of an audience's perspective, actually showing an image of the audience to start thinking about that process, that it's not about us, it's about them. I'm not going to show an image for all of them, Christy, but I hope that starts giving an idea of all the different ways that we can bring the same information, but hopefully more interestingly and more digestibly.
I think that's just brilliant. I love how you've shown it.
Thank you.
You know, you not just said it, but you've shown us exactly, because I think we all know not to overdo the information that we're putting on slides. But it's harder than to take the step and say, okay, well, what do I do instead? And actually, it's quite easy. It's not hard.
It is, absolutely.
And the impact is so much more. So I thought that was brilliant. And I saw comments in the chat here saying that this is so useful.
Right. Another little a little thing to add is that when I train people on this, quite often they say, yeah, but the presentation that I've made is actually the document that I'm going to share. And I want to have all of that information on, because maybe people want it as a reference afterwards, or they weren't in the presentation, so they want to read what's in there. And so I need to have all of those full sentences for it to make sense. My suggestion, it does take a little bit more time, but it certainly makes you so much more of a powerful presenter, is to make 2 decks. And you have your first deck, which has got all of the stuff in that you know people might want to have as a handout afterwards. And then you work on refining it and taking things out until it becomes that digestible deck that you're actually going to present with.
Which comes back to understanding the audience's needs, I guess, and what they want. And that's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super useful. Okay, so I want to move us on now to the topic of how do you leave your audience with a message that really sticks with them. And to do that, let's start with this poll for everyone who's here today. So I'm gonna launch the poll. Hopefully you guys will see that on your screen. And the question is, how much can an audience recall of a presentation after 3 days? How much do you think that an audience can recall? Just give you a minute here to answer. Oh, I can see already that we have 2 responses that are that are in the lead. I'll just give another moment or 2 for everyone to participate. I think that's most
people
of
just need
us.
to kind of reflect for themselves, like when they've sat in a conference and maybe presentation after presentation.
How much do you retain?
Yeah, how much would I have actually remembered?
Absolutely.
3 days after.
Okay, so I'm going to share the results. Hopefully, Tara, can you see that as well?
Yes, I can see that. I can see that. Yeah, well, 58% of you are absolutely on the button there. It is 10% after 3 days. Yes, unfortunately, a mere 10%. And that is just having words on a screen and words speaking. Actually, I'm just gonna. I've still got that box up there, and I can't see you anymore. There we go. That's better. Now, we can increase that to 56% if we have slides that have images and the key points. So they're already a great lift. Just the last example that I gave on the death by PowerPoint, if we just have that, the key message and an image, immediately the recollection goes up to 56%, which is really impressive. But do you know a really good tip to make it 100%?
I can make some guesses, but
write notes. Then you've actually got a recollection of it, and you can go back to it. So I think more people need to kind of like take their notepads or open up a Word document when they're watching a presentation. We overestimate how much we're going to remember, and if it's really important for us, then it's really great that we actually make a record of it. There's an additional advantage that you really have to listen if you're going to take notes. And also there's this wonderful kind of, I don't know, alchemy that happens between your hand and your brain when you take notes, that actually the information gets more embedded because of that action. And of course you have a record of it. So I think that that's one thing that will really help messages stick, is that you actually say to your audience, take notes. But if that's not possible, what you need to do is for yourself, just be really super clear on your key messages. I think a lot of people make presentations and just think about the information that they're going to bring, or the data that they're going to use to inform people. But an audience would like you, the presenter, you as the expert, to tell us what that means and tell us what the point is of what we were saying, and actually bring that key message really clearly. Because quite often, we're not mind readers. We don't know what those key messages are going to be unless they're really spelled out for us. And then it's really fine to talk about those key messages and those points in the presentation and repeat them. I know that quite a few presenters go, oh, I don't want to repeat things, because then I'm just kind of like either being boring, or the audience are going to go, yeah, I know, we heard that. But actually, your material really well, inside out, upside down. But this is the first time that the audience is hearing it. And it actually helps them for some repetition. It helps for those key messages to actually be pushed home. And then the recollection will really improve in the long run. And then one final point on that is bringing enthusiasm, bringing passion, bringing the fact that you care into your presentation. There's a really great book called Lend Me Your Ears by a real presentation guru called Max Atkinson. And he says, of all the emotions that can be conveyed in a presentation, enthusiasm is the most important. And he says, think back to when you're at school and you've got a teacher, and you have a teacher. You will remember those enthusiastic teachers. You will remember those teachers that really cared about what they were talking about. And so that's what we need to do. We cannot move others unless we're moved ourselves. So that's really going to help us having those messages stick.
I love that. I mean, when you hear someone speak about something and they're really passionate, you can't help but be drawn into that. Indeed. And I think it's fascinating because sometimes you'll hear people speak who who aren't natural speakers. You know, they're normally quite quiet, but then they get onto a topic that they feel strongly about, and all of a sudden it just comes out. Yes. And it's so compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I really liked what you said about taking notes also. I've often looked at other people who don't take notes and thought, how do you remember these things?
How do you remember? Exactly.
And now I'm questioning, maybe they actually don't. That's great. Okay, well, I think we're doing quite well for time. So let's move on briefly to our last topic, yes, which is what are the secret ingredients of presentations that influence and persuade people? And I guess here, you know, in a context of conservation, we might be thinking about those people who are outside of conservation, who aren't, you know, converted, let's say, to conservation.
That's true.
How do we reach and influence them?
But before we do, I'm actually making like a massive presentation blunder right now, because I'm realizing that my battery is nearly run out. I'm getting this flashing telling me that I need to plug in. So
please go for it. I love that you're a real person and are doing this right now. I just wanted to say too that this last topic about influence and persuading, I think is an interesting one, because sometimes, and Tara and I were talking about this a little bit before we went live, sometimes we hear from people that those words like influence and persuade have a negative connotation, when actually they have this huge power to do good. And you're back, Tara, lovely. So yeah, I'd love to hear, you know, not just about how you might, what these secret ingredients for influencing and persuading people are, but what's meant by influencing and persuading. What is that?
From a position where whenever you stand up and speak, it's an opportunity to persuade and inspire, because you always want to create a change in your audience.
Tara, your audio, we can hear you, but it's a little bit choppy and a little bit fuzzy.
Is that better?
Try again, just test again. So I think it's about the same. You're there, but it's not as clear as you were before.
That's a shame.
There we go.
Better? Okay.
That, yeah.
I'm improvising. So, say if, for example, you've done some research and you want to present that research. Now, it could be seen that you just want to tell people about what you found out. However, if you dig a little bit further, what you'll realize is that actually what you want to do is have people think favorably of that research, to think that you did a good job, or to think that this is something that needs to be taken further or acted upon. Mm-hmm. And so to do that, there needs to be influence and persuasion, because there is something you want people to do with that. If, for example, you are talking about funding, you want to get funding for a project or your organisation, that's a little bit more obvious. You want to influence the audience so that they open their pockets and they fund you in some way. So again, it's about influencing, but not in some kind of dirty, icky way. It's about you communicating about something that you care about, and other people almost being infected with the care that you're bringing, because you wouldn't. I don't agree with ever speaking about something that you're not passionate about, that you care about and that you agree with, because then otherwise you're going to be an inauthentic speaker. Yeah. So I think that it's always an opportunity to influence and persuade.
Neat. That's great. I like that, because I think sometimes perhaps in the conservation sector especially, we're quite hesitant to use those kinds of skills for a greater good, because ultimately a person who's funding a project is doing so because they're also moved and excited about what they're able to contribute to and what that's able to achieve and impact. So it's a win-win situation for everyone essentially. And I think we can use skills of influencing and persuading so much more.
Yeah.
Than we do.
Especially now when we do have such a crisis on our hands, that people need to know what's happening in the nature conservation sector, and then what they can personally do about it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, did we cover everything you wanted to say, Tara, about that last point? Shall we move on to Q&A?
Absolutely, really happy to do that.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a wealth of information, but really, really valuable practical information and tips. And I want to now turn it over to everyone who's joining. If you have any questions for Tara, now's the time. We've got about 10 minutes. I got excited there. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. Please pop them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box if you have any questions. And definitely take advantage of Tara's being here and her wealth of knowledge. Okay, so I can see one question so far. Thanks, Rebecca, for kicking us off. The question is, do these principles still apply when you are presenting non-live content, such as a YouTube video?
I think they do, actually. I mean, I think now video most definitely comes into the realm of all of these things. If we think about our favourite videos that we're watching on YouTube, there's enthusiasm, there is very digestible information. It's valuable to us, but we're really being taken on a journey. And in some ways, it's even more challenging because we don't have an audience to maybe feed back to us directly. So we are literally, being on camera. But I would say nearly all of the guidance would be the same. Yes.
Yeah, great. Thanks, and thanks, Rebecca, for the question. That's so relevant, because so much of the content we put out and we consume now is in forms like YouTube videos. So I think that's a really great question.
I've been working so much more with clients over the last year with lockdown on working to camera, whether that be something like today where it's being live streamed, or that it's being recorded and then maybe delivered to potential clients or anybody that they want to communicate with. It's just such an important medium these days.
Absolutely. Great, thank you. By the way, Tara, your audio is there. You're mostly clear, but it's a little bit softer. It might just be a distance thing. Okay, so there's a question here from JT. This is very helpful, especially because you're passionate about it. Are there additional tips to keep in mind when presenting yourself in a job interview?
Really good question. I think that one is authenticity.
Sorry, Tara, I can't quite hear you.
Okay.
That's a bit better.
Authenticity. I think that quite often we have an idea of who we should be in an interview. And I think that to be authentic and genuine, whether it's a job interview or whether it's giving a presentation, you have to be you. I mean, it's a very old saying that, you know, be yourself because everybody else is taken. I think that's, but it's so true. You know, these are people that are going to be working with you when you get the job. So you need to really be yourself. The second thing is to practice a lot the potential interview questions. So what could you possibly be asked, and come up with maybe different interpretations of that. And don't necessarily rehearse them so that they're wooden. You know, sometimes it will start becoming unnatural if we know things word for word, but at least so that we're armed with potential responses. Practicing is really, really important. And the third thing, a little bit like at the beginning, where we talked about I get to, a job interview is a two-way street. It's not just about them finding out if you are right for them. It's also you finding out whether it's they're right for you. So there's an opportunity for questions. There's an opportunity for a conversation to happen, rather than it just be, oh my goodness, I'm going for a job interview. It's like, no, you know, I'm having this opportunity to get to share my experience, for them to get to know me. You know, again, I get to have this opportunity. I think is really important in a job interview.
I love what you just said, and you covered so many of the points that we use also when we work with people to prepare for job interviews, and that's exactly it. Remembering that it's a two-way conversation, because if you go into it thinking that you're put on a hot seat and you have to deliver, that's a very different feeling than going into it and thinking, what more can I learn about this company and this organization and this role? You know, what more can I share about me and my interests and my experience, and seeing where it goes from there. So really, really neat. And I also, I really like the tip about sort of going in armed with either knowing what potential questions you could be asked, or also just what information you can share that you know might be relevant to the interviewer. So super valuable. Great question, and thanks, Tara, for that. Okay, so we've got a question here from Catherine. When we do not have the answer to specific questions, what would be the best way to deal with it, avoiding disengaging the audience? I'm assuming that's, you know, if you've presented and then you're asked a question, or is,
I would imagine that's what Catherine is asking. Okay, Catherine, there's a couple of things. One is that you can prepare for a Q&A as diligently as a presentation. Often, if you actually just sit down and think, okay, given everything that I'm bringing to the audience, what could they possibly ask me? And if you actually make a note of those questions and create answers for them, there's a really good chance that actually already you know the answer and that you're prepared with them. But of course, you know, that might be 50%. And there's always going to be someone that sends a curveball and you really, really don't know the answer. I think, first of all, it's really important to acknowledge that question. Say, thank you very much for that. That's super interesting. And I would say, be honest and just say, at this moment in time, I don't have the correct information to give you at this present time. I feel that I might not give the accuracy that is required. So if you come to me at the end, we can exchange emails, or we can somehow get in contact. I will do more research and I'll get back to you on that.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay, and we've got a question here from Kate. Do you have any special tips for presenting to children? And I think that's a great question, because obviously in conservation, in the environmental education field, for instance, it's so important to engage people who are young.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have to say, apart from having I have very little experience with working with children in a presentation situation. The only time that I have worked with children is that on some events where there is a startup or a pitch element to it, what they'll do is they'll bring in a children's jury, because the idea is that if you can explain your idea to a child, then you can explain it to everybody. So I think that's the key to any kind of communication, is it needs to be super, super simple, whether that's to grown-ups or and also again to think about them. This is such an opportunity to think about. There's a saying, what's in it for me? We need to do that with grown-ups. We also need to do it for children. They're sitting there, just kind of, okay, why should I care? What's in it for me? I think there needs to be that, okay, let's step into that child's world, and think about what do they care about, and how can I then approach the topic from that, rather than what do I want to tell them.
So neat. I very recently spoke to a teacher who was teaching environmental subjects, and she said something very simple, that she always looks for how she can connect with and engage her kids around something that she knows that they're interested in.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, without that basis, it's really hard to go anywhere.
Absolutely.
It's really neat.
Yeah.
So we don't have any other questions from our audience here, but I do have one, if I can ask a cheeky question. On a conversation we had earlier, you mentioned the human aspect of communications and public speaking. Can you just take a moment to explain what you mean by that? I think you were talking about, emotions and just being human when we're communicating.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what I encourage people to consider is that we're not only always thinking things, but we're always feeling things. And quite often we don't consider the feelings of our audience when we're presenting. And there's a lot more neurological research that shows that we make a decision emotionally, and then we look around for the data or the information to back up that emotional decision that we made. It's got a lot to do with the burning of glucose. It's depending on where in our brain we live, it's a lot easier to live in the emotional part. We don't burn as much glucose. So with that in mind, I find that it's really important that we not only connect cerebrally with people about the things that the logic, the reason, but we connect with emotions, because that's how they're being inspired, that's how they're being motivated. And so a really good tip is, well, first of all, just think, okay, well, what do I want to feel? And then once I want to feel excited, then start thinking how we're going to do that.
That's really neat. I just loved when you said that, and I think that's such a valuable point to touch on and probably end on, is that it's not just about what we're saying, but it's about the emotional component and how we feel about it too, which is obviously incredibly relevant in the conservation sector with the state of the world. So thanks so much, Tara, for that. And I think we're out of time for today, but we've answered all the questions, which is a first potentially on a webinar. So I'm really happy about that. But before we finish, where can people go if they want any more information or more resources? And I think Tara's actually developed something specifically for nature professionals, haven't you?
I have, yes. I've been honoured, shall we say, watched quite a few nature conservation presentations over the last year, and so many are interesting and fascinating. But what I found was that the same mistakes were being made, and I just thought, what I want to do is just create something that tackles those and actually have people know, well, how can they do it differently? How can they develop and improve? So I've made a document, 5 nature conservation presentation mistakes and how to avoid them. And that can be downloaded from my website, which is causeandeffectspeeches.com. So people are very, very welcome. In fact, I really, really encourage you to to take this conversation one step further and go and find that.
That's fantastic. That probably such a useful resource. So thanks for sharing that and making it available. And I've so enjoyed speaking with you and hosting you and learning from you today. I hope this is really useful for everyone on the call too. Super valuable and potentially really impactful advice. So thank you. We're going to share the recording and all the resources. Oh, sorry, it was a little bit, there was a slight delay there, so I spoke over you. But we'll share the resources, we'll share the guide that Tara just mentioned and your website on our website by tomorrow, so you can have all that. We run a webinar here at Conservation Careers each month. Our next webinar in November is about 6 steps towards effective conservation leadership, and that's with the Barefoot Thinking Company, who are experts in leadership. It's on November 23rd. And then we have another one back by popular demand, which is Women in Conservation Part 2 on December 14th. So you can find those on the website. Those are the next 2 webinars coming up. We're excited to see you there. And in the meantime, thanks so much, Tara, for joining today. It's been such a pleasure and a delight to have you. Thanks everyone for joining the call, and take care and stay safe, and we'll see you in our next webinar.